According to legend, the twins were raised by a she-wolf. The myth of Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome.
Imagine a time long before the roar of the Colosseum, before the legions marched across continents, before the name Rome echoed through history. Picture a land untouched by empire, a peninsula of wild, untamed beauty. This is Italy, but not as we know it. This is the world before Rome. Let's journey back, thousands of years, to a time when the story of this land was written not in stone and marble, but in the rustling of leaves, the flow of rivers, and the whispers of the wind across sun-drenched hills. The Apennine Mountains, the spine of Italy, stood silent and majestic, their slopes covered in dense forests of oak, beech, and pine. Bears, wolves, and wild boar roamed these woods, their only rulers the laws of nature. Crystal-clear rivers, like the Tiber and the Arno, carved their paths through the landscape, their banks lush with reeds and willows. These waterways weren't yet arteries of commerce or borders of provinces. They were lifelines for small, scattered communities, sources of fresh water and fish, their gentle currents carrying fallen leaves, not warships. The coastlines were a mosaic of sandy beaches, rocky cliffs, and marshy wetlands. The Mediterranean Sea, later to be called Mare Nostrum. Our sea, by the Romans, lapped against the shores with a quiet, timeless rhythm. Small fishing boats, crafted from hollowed logs, might have dotted the horizon, but the grand harbors and bustling ports of the future were not even a dream. Who were the people of this silent land? They weren't a unified nation. They were a tapestry of tribes, each with its own language, customs, and gods. In the north, the Ligurians and the Gauls lived in the shadow of the Alps. In the central plains, peoples like the Umbrians, the Sabines, and the Latins themselves tilled the fertile soil. Further south, the Samnites, tough mountain folk, carved out a life in the rugged highlands. These were the original inhabitants, the ancestors of a world-changing civilization. They lived in small, often fortified, hilltop villages. Their homes were simple huts of wattle and daub with thatched roofs. Life was a cycle of seasons, planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, and huddling around fires during the winter, telling stories of gods, spirits, and heroes. Their world was animated by spirits. Every tree, every spring, every rock could house a deity. Their religion was deeply connected to the earth, to the fertility of the soil, and the health of their livestock. They made offerings of grain and wine, not in grand temples, but in sacred groves, and at simple open-air altars. This was a world of superstition and ritual, a world where the divine was not in a distant heaven, but right here, in the rustling grass and the flowing stream. This era is often called prehistory, because written records are scarce. What we know comes from the earth itself, from archaeology, the fragments of pottery, the metalwork of a bronze pin, the outline of a post hole from an ancient hut. These are the silent words of this forgotten age. Each discovery is a tiny piece of a massive puzzle, helping us reconstruct the lives of these early Italians. Imagine a shepherd watching his flock on a hillside, the same hillside where, centuries later, the Forum would be built. He wouldn't see the future Senate House or the triumphal arches. He would see rolling grasslands, a few scattered huts in the distance, and the 7 hills of his home, quiet and green. Under the Italian sun, he might worry about a coming storm or a wolf stalking his sheep. But the idea of a global empire rising from this very spot would be beyond his wildest imagination. This period wasn't an empty void waiting for Rome to happen. It was a vibrant and complex world in its own right. It was a time of small-scale conflicts, of shifting alliances between tribes, of cultural exchange and slow, steady technological development. The introduction of ironworking, for example, would have been a revolution, changing everything from farming tools to weapons. And they were not entirely alone. From the east, Greek colonists began to arrive, establishing cities like Syracuse and Naples in the south, bringing with them their philosophy, their art, and their alphabet. To the north, the mysterious and sophisticated Etruscans were building their own powerful civilization in what is now Tuscany. They were skilled metalworkers, sailors, and engineers, and their influence on the early Latins would be profound. So, this silence before Rome was not truly silent. It was filled with the sounds of different languages, the clang of early blacksmiths' hammers, the prayers to 1,000 different gods, and the footsteps of peoples whose names are now mostly lost to history. It was a world of potential, a crucible of cultures. The stage was being set, the fertile land, the strategic location in the Mediterranean, the resilient and adaptable people. All the ingredients were there. The story of Rome is not just about the city itself. It's about the convergence of these ancient cultures, the clash and mingling of the Etruscans, the Greeks, and the many Italic tribes. Rome was not built in a day, and it certainly wasn't built in a vacuum. It rose from this rich, ancient, and deeply layered world. Understanding this prehistoric landscape is crucial. It's the foundation upon which everything else was built. The hills of Rome provided a natural defense. The Tiber River provided a connection to the sea. The traditions of the Latin people provided the social bedrock. When we look at the grandeur of the Roman Empire, we must remember its humble beginnings. Here in the quiet hills and valleys of a pre-Roman Italy, this was the world before the eagle standards, before the aqueducts, before the law that would shape Western civilization. It was a time of immense possibility, the quiet morning before the dawn of one of history's greatest empires. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into the world before Rome fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from history. We have so much more to explore together. See you in the next chapter. 0 o'clock to 0:15. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Last time, we journeyed with Aeneas, from the ashes of Troy to the shores of Italy. Today, we're fast-forwarding a few centuries, down the long line of his descendants, to a kingdom poised on the brink of destiny. Alba Longa, nestled in the green hills of Latium, near the gentle flow of the Tiber River. 0:15 to 0:45, imagine a prosperous city, a beacon of civilization in a land of scattered tribes. This was the legacy Aeneas built, passed down through generations of kings. And now, the throne belongs to a man named Anu. By all accounts, Numitor was a good and just ruler, the rightful heir by birthright, a king who cherished peace and prosperity for his people. He was the elder son of King Procus, and his succession should have been a simple, straightforward affair. 0:45 to 1:15, but history, as we know, is rarely that simple. Numitor had a younger brother, a man whose name would echo through this legend with the clang of steel and the whisper of betrayal. Where Numitor was content, Amulius was consumed by ambition. He looked at his elder brother on the throne not with familial pride, but with annoying, bitter envy. He saw the crown, the power, the adoration of the people, and he believed it should all be his. 1:15 to 1:45, this isn't just a family squabble. It's the spark that will ignite a fire. The political atmosphere in Alba Longa grew thick with tension. Amulius, charismatic and cunning, began to sow seeds of doubt among the nobles and the military. He was a master of whispers and backroom deals. He likely promised wealth to the greedy, power to the ambitious, and stability to the fearful. He painted Numitor not as a peaceful king, but as a weak one, incapable of defending Alba Longa from its rivals. 1:45 to 2:15, while Numitor governed with an open hand, Amulius plotted with a clenched fist. He saw his brother's gentle nature as a fatal flaw, an opening he could exploit. The kingdom was divided, not by an external enemy, but by this schism growing from within the royal palace itself. The loyalty of the court began to fracture. Some remained faithful to their rightful king, Numitor, respecting the laws of succession and his benevolent reign. 2:15 to 2:45 others, however, were drawn to Amulius's flame. They saw in him a strength, a ruthlessness they mistook for leadership. He was the wolf circling the flock, and his target was the shepherd. This growing faction gave Amulius the support he needed to make his move, and when he did, it was swift and merciless. He didn't challenge Numitor to a duel or a call for a vote. He staged a coup. 2:45 to 3:15, with the backing of his supporters in the army, Amulius seized control of Alba Longa. He stormed the palace, drove his brother from the throne, and declared himself king. Numita, the rightful ruler, was overthrown, his reign ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, chilling finality of betrayal. Amulius had won the crown he so desperately craved, but a throne built on treachery is an unstable seat. 315 to 345. Amulius knew that as long as Numita's line could continue, his own claim to power was under constant threat. A usurper's greatest fear is the rightful heir. So, his first act as king was to systematically eliminate any potential challenge. He had Numita's sons, his own nephews, hunted down and killed. A brutal, unforgivable act designed to sever Numita's branch of the family tree forever. 345 to 430, but there was one loose end. Numita's daughter, a young woman named Rhea Silvia. Killing her outright might have been too much, even for the divided public of Alba Longa. So Amulius devised a crueler, more cunning plan. He couldn't allow her to have children, who would grow up to be legitimate claimants to the throne and symbols of rebellion. So, under the guise of granting her a great honor, he forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal Virgin. 432, 5 o'clock. Let's pause on that for a moment. The Vestal Virgins were the priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and family. It was one of the greatest religious honors a woman in this society could receive. They were revered, respected, and held to the highest standards. But this honor came with a sacred, unbreakable vow, a vow of celibacy for 30 years. 5 o'clock to 5:30. By making Rhea Silvia a Vestal, Amulius thought he had played the perfect political chess move. He had imprisoned her not in a dungeon, but in a golden cage of religious duty. He had honored her in a way that publicly neutralized her as a threat. He had ensured, or so he believed, that Numita's bloodline would die out with her. He had cut off all hope of a legitimate heir ever returning to challenge his stolen crown. 5:30 to 6:15, so let's survey the scene. Amulius has created, the rightful king Numita is deposed, perhaps imprisoned or living in exile, stripped of his power and grieving for his murdered sons. His only daughter, Rhea Silvia, is locked away in a temple, sworn to a life without children. Amulius sits on the throne of Alba Longa, his hands stained with family blood, believing he has secured his reign for all time. He has silenced all his rivals and eliminated every threat. 6:15 to 6:45. The kingdom on the Tiber is under the thumb of a tyrant. Justice seems to have fled, and ambition has conquered birthright. It's a dark time for the lineage of Aeneas. From the outside, it looks like the end of a story. Amulius has won. He has complete control. But in mythology, the gods often have other plans, and forcing a woman into a temple to prevent her from having children is precisely the kind of challenge the fates love to answer. 6:45 to 7:30. Amulius, in his arrogance, believed he could control destiny. He thought he could subvert the prophecy in the bloodline of kings with a simple political maneuver. He had accounted for every human threat, every political angle, every earthly possibility. What he failed to account for was the divine. He had shut a door, but he was about to discover that the gods can walk through walls. 7:30 to 8 o'clock. This act of cruelty against Rhea Silvia, intended to be the final chapter in the fall of Numita's house, was in fact the very event that would set in motion the greatest legend of them all. Because within the sacred walls of the Temple of Vesta, a miracle was about to occur. A god would intervene, and the young priestess, sworn to have no children, would become the mother of twins. 8 o'clock to 8:45. These weren't just any twins. These were the boys who would be cast out to die, saved by a she-wolf, and raised by a shepherd. These were the boys who would grow up to avenge their grandfather, overthrow the tyrant, and fulfill a destiny far greater than the throne of Alba Longa. These were the boys who would stand on the banks of the Tiber, look at 7 hills, and decide to build a city. These were Romulus and Remus. Las 8:45, las 9:15. Amulius's paranoid ambition, his betrayal of his brother, and his cruelty towards his niece created the exact conditions for the birth of Rome. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most desperate attempts to prevent a future are the very things that make it inevitable. The stage is now set. We have a villain, a captive princess, and a stolen kingdom waiting for its true heirs to return. 9:15 to 10 o'clock. Next time, we will witness the divine intervention that changes everything. We'll delve into the miraculous birth of Romulus and Remus, the fury of King Amulius when he discovers his perfect plan has failed, and the fateful decision that sends to infants in a basket floating down the Tiber River straight into the heart of legend. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you're enjoying this story of power, betrayal, and destiny, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Until then, stay curious. In the heart of Alba Longa, a shadow of fear clung to the usurper king. He had stolen the throne from his brother, Numitor. But he couldn't steal the future. A prophecy, whispered in hushed tones through the city's alleys and halls, haunted his every waking moment. It spoke of twin boys, born of Numitor's line, destined to rise and reclaim what was rightfully theirs. This wasn't just a possibility. It was a promise of his downfall, a ticking clock, counting down the days of his reign. Determined to defy fate, Amulius took drastic measures. He had already murdered Numitor's sons, but he couldn't bring himself to kill Numitor's only daughter, the beautiful Rhea Silvia. Instead, he devised a plan he believed was just as effective, a way to cut off Numitor's lineage forever. He forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal Virgin, a priestess sworn to the goddess Vesta. This was a life of immense honor, but it came with an unbreakable vow, a vow of celibacy, of lifelong chastity. By making her a Vestal, Amulius thought he had sealed his future, ensuring no child could ever be born to challenge him. The prophecy, he believed, was now just an empty threat, a forgotten whisper in the wind. He had locked away the key to his destruction, or so he thought. Life as a Vestal Virgin was one of quiet devotion, tending to the sacred flame of Vesta that was never allowed to die out. Rhea Silvia performed her duties with grace, her days marked by ritual and prayer within the temple's hallowed walls. One fateful afternoon, weary from her tasks under the warm Italian sun, she sought refuge in a sacred grove near the Tiber River. She went to draw water, but the quiet solitude of the grove and the gentle murmur of the river lulled her into a deep sleep by the water's edge. The world around her seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for a pivotal moment in history to unfold. It was in this vulnerable, dreamlike state that she was visited by a figure of breathtaking power and majesty. It was no mortal man. Standing before her was Mars, the formidable god of war, his presence radiating an aura of divine strength and passion. Some say he was captivated by her beauty as she slept. Others believe he was an instrument of destiny, the agent chosen by the fates to fulfill the prophecy that Amulius so desperately tried to prevent. In that sacred grove, the divine and the mortal worlds collided. Mars, the god of conflict and protector of Rome, lay with the Vestal Virgin. This was not an act of mere passion, but a cosmic event. A union that would set in motion the founding of the greatest empire the world would ever know. When Rhea Silvia awoke, she was alone. The grove was as peaceful as it had been before, but she knew something profound had changed. In the months that followed, the truth became undeniable. She, a sworn Vestal Virgin, was carrying children. The fear she must have felt is unimaginable. The punishment for a Vestal breaking her vow of chastity was horrific. To be buried alive, her life was now forfeit. Yet, within her, she carried not just one life, but two. A secret that could either be her death sentence or the very fulfillment of destiny. As her pregnancy advanced, she could no longer hide her condition. The secret was out, and it sent shockwaves through Alba Longa. When the time came, Rhea Silvia gave birth to 2 boys. They were remarkably healthy and strong, possessing a vigor that seemed almost supernatural. She named them Romulus and Remus. Looking at her sons, she saw not the mark of her shame, but the legacy of a god. She held in her arms the twin boys of the prophecy, but her joy was short-lived. The news reached the ears of King Amulius, and his fear turned to pure rage. The prophecy he had worked so hard to extinguish had just been ignited. The very children who were foretold to overthrow him were now born. His cruel solution was immediate and absolute. Amulius refused to believe Rhea Silvia's story of a divine encounter. To him, it was a convenient lie to cover her transgression. He condemned her, locking her away in a dark prison to await her grim fate. He then turned his attention to the infants, the source of all his fears. He could not bring himself to stain his own hands with the blood of his kin, his grandnephews. So, he summoned a servant and gave him a chilling order. Take the twin boys to the Tiber River and cast them into its currents to be swept away and drowned. The river, swollen from recent rains, was a raging torrent. It was a certain death sentence. The servant, his heart heavy with pity for the innocent babies, carried the twins in a simple wooden basket to the river's edge. He couldn't bear to watch them perish in the violent waters. Seeing a spot where the river had flooded its banks, creating a shallow, calmer pool of water at the foot of a wild fig tree, Romulus gently placed the basket there. He hoped, perhaps, that a kinder fate might find them. He pushed the basket into the gentle current of the pool and walked away, leaving the future of Rome to the mercy of the gods and the river. As the river's floodwaters receded, the basket carrying Romulus and Remus drifted, until it came to rest on the soft mud of the riverbank, right at the base of the Palatine Hill. The twins, hungry and cold, began to cry. Their cries, however, did not go unheard. They attracted the attention of a creature drawn by a divine instinct. It was not a person who found them, but a she-wolf, a lupa. This was no ordinary wolf. She had just lost her own cubs, and was guided by the gods perhaps, even by Mars himself, to this very spot. Instead of harming the infants, the she-wolf was filled with a maternal tenderness. She approached the basket, nudged the crying babies, and gently licked them clean. Then she lay down beside them and offered them her own milk, nursing the human children as if they were her own. This miraculous event, a wild beast nurturing the abandoned sons of a god, was a powerful omen. They were under divine protection. A little later, a woodpecker, a bird sacred to Mars, also arrived, bringing them small morsels of food to eat. Nature itself, guided by divine will, was conspiring to keep the twin boys alive. They had survived the king's decree and the river's wrath, saved by the very wilderness that should have claimed them. Their journey was just beginning. Thank you for joining me on this chapter of Rome's incredible origin story. If you're enjoying this journey through history and myth, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what happens next to the twin boys. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our journey through the founding of Rome. In our last episode, we left off on a cliffhanger. Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, had just given birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus, fathered by the god Mars himself. A miraculous birth, yes, but one that put them in mortal danger. Today, we dive into Chapter 4, Cast into the River. The news of the twins' birth reached King Amulius like a thunderclap. Remember, Amulius was the usurper king, the one who had stolen the throne from his brother, Numitor. He had forced Rhea Silvia, Numitor's daughter, to become a Vestal virgin precisely to prevent her from having heirs who could one day challenge his rule. But fate, it seems, had other plans. The prophecy of his downfall, now embodied in these two tiny infants, was ringing in his ears. Consumed by fear and paranoia, Amulius made a chilling decision. He couldn't risk letting these boys grow up. They were a direct threat to his power, a living, breathing reminder of his stolen crown. He summoned his most trusted servants and gave them a terrible command. Take the infants and dispose of them. Kill them. His order was absolute. He wanted every trace of Numitor's line erased from the world. Imagine the scene. Two loyal but terrified servants taking the newborn twins from their mother. We can only guess at Rhea Silvia's anguish, her pleas, her heartbreak as her children were torn from her arms. The servants carried the babies, perhaps wrapped in a simple cloth. Their destination, a grim one. Their orders were to kill the boys, likely by drowning them in the Tiber River, a common and cruel method of dispatching unwanted infants in the ancient world. It was a way to let the river's currents wash away the evidence of a dark deed. But as the servants approached the banks of the Tiber, something extraordinary happened. The river was in flood. Recent heavy rains had caused it to swell and overflow its banks, turning the surrounding fields into a vast, marshy expanse of shallow pools. The main current was raging and inaccessible. They couldn't reach the deep, fast-flowing water where the infants would surely perish. Standing at the edge of the floodwaters, looking at the two helpless babies in their arms, the servants had a change of heart. Perhaps it was a flicker of pity. Perhaps they were awestruck by the divine parentage of the children. Or maybe they simply believed that carrying out the king's brutal order in this way was impossible and, more importantly, an affront to the gods. Drowning the sons of Mars, that was a risk they were unwilling to take. They knew that angering a god was far worse than angering a mortal king. So, they devised a new plan. One that would satisfy the letter of the king's command, if not its spirit. They found a small, crude basket. Some stories say it was a simple wooden trough. Gently, they placed the twin boys inside. Romulus and Remus, oblivious to the drama swirling around them, were now nestled together, their fate resting in a fragile vessel. The servants took the basket to the edge of the stagnant floodwaters and set it adrift. They reasoned that as the floodwaters receded, the basket would eventually be carried into the main current of the Tiber and swept away to a certain doom. They could return to King Romulus and report, with a technically clear conscience, that they had consigned the infants to the river. The king's order was fulfilled. The children were gone. And so, the basket began its journey. It wasn't a violent, dramatic launch into a raging torrent. Instead, it was a gentle push into the calm, shallow water near the riverbank. The basket floated slowly, bobbing on the placid surface, a tiny ark carrying the future of Rome. The servants watched for a moment as it drifted away, then turned and left, leaving the twins to the mercy of the elements and the will of the gods. This is one of the most iconic images in Roman mythology. It's a powerful symbol of vulnerability and destiny. These two infants, stripped of their royal heritage and abandoned to die, are now in the hands of fate, represented by the flowing water. The river, which was meant to be their grave, had paradoxically become their cradle. The flood, which seemed like just a random act of nature, was actually a divine intervention, a crucial plot twist orchestrated by a higher power. The basket drifted aimlessly for a time. It was a silent, lonely boy. The cries of the infants were the only sound, lost in the vast, watery landscape. The sun beat down, and the hours passed. They were completely helpless, at the mercy of the current, the wind, and whatever creatures might lurk in the reeds. Their survival seemed impossible. But the river had a destination in mind. The gentle current carried the basket along the edge of the floodplain until it snagged on the roots of a wild fig tree. This tree, later known as the Ficus ruminalis, stood at the base of a hill that would one day become legendary, the Palatine Hill. The basket, caught fast, came to a rest on the muddy ground as the floodwaters began to slowly recede. The babies were safe. For the moment, they were alive, but they were alone and hungry. Their cries echoed in the sudden stillness. It seemed their ordeal was far from over. Left on the muddy bank, exposed and defenseless, their survival still hung by a thread. Who, or what, would find them here, in this wild place, at the foot of the 7 hills? What happens next is perhaps the most famous and miraculous part of the entire legend. The cries of the infants did not go unheard. A rescuer was on its way, but it wasn't a person. It was an animal, drawn by the sound and, perhaps, by divine compulsion. A Shiva. Join us next time as we witness this incredible encounter and learn how a wild beast became the unlikely savior and foster mother to the founders of the world's greatest empire. The story is only getting started. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, and do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter in the epic story of Romulus and Remus. See you next time. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep violet, casting long, dancing shadows across the rugged banks of the Tiber River. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and wild mint, grew still as dusk settled. It was in this liminal space between day and night that a new chapter in our story began. A chapter not of men and their ambitions, but of something far more ancient, far more primal. High on the Palatine Hill, where the fig trees grew thick and wild, a lone she-wolf emerged from her den. She was a magnificent creature, her coat a tapestry of gray and silver, her eyes the color of amber, burning with the fierce intelligence of the wild. Her own pups had been lost to a harsh winter, and a deep, gnawing emptiness echoed in her heart, a hunger that no hunt could satisfy. Drawn by a thirst she could not ignore, she made her way down the familiar, winding path towards the river. Her paws patted silently over moss-covered stones and fallen leaves. The world was her domain, and she moved through it with a quiet confidence, her senses alive to every rustle in the undergrowth, every whisper of the wind through the reeds. As she neared the water's edge, a sound unlike any she had ever heard before reached her ears. It was not the cry of a lost lamb or the bleating of a young deer. It was a thin, piercing wail, a sound filled with a desperation that resonated with the ache in her own soul. Her ears swiveled, her head tilted, and she followed the sound, her steps now cautious, her instincts on high alert. The wailing grew louder, a duet of distress that pulled her forward past the thicket of reeds and towards the gnarled roots of an ancient fig tree, the very one sacred to the god of the wild, the ruminal fig tree. There, nestled in a crude basket of woven reeds, lay the source of the sound. She peered into the basket, her amber eyes widening in disbelief. Two small creatures, pink and helpless, lay squirming. They were not wolf pups. They were hairless, fragile, their tiny faces scrunched up as they cried out to the fading light. They were man cubs, abandoned to the mercy of the river. Any other predator would have seen them as an easy meal. A fox or a wild boar would have shown no mercy. But the she-wolf did not see prey. As she looked upon the two infants, the raw, primal instinct of a mother surged through her. The emptiness in her heart was suddenly, unexpectedly, filled by an overwhelming wave of protectiveness. Their cries were not a signal of weakness, but a call she was uniquely destined to answer. Gently, cautiously, she nudged the basket with her wet nose. The crying softened for a moment, replaced by small, curious gurgles. One of the twins, the bolder of the two, reached out a tiny hand, his fingers brushing against her coarse fur. There was no fear in his touch, only a desperate, innocent need. In that moment a bond was forged, a bond that defied the laws of nature, a pact made between the wild and the civilized. The she-wolf, driven by an instinct deeper than hunger, knew what she had to do. These were not her pups by birth, but they were her children now. With the utmost care, she began to lick them clean. Her rough tongue was surprisingly gentle, washing away the grime of their journey, soothing their frantic cries until they subsided into soft, sleepy murmurs. She nudged them closer, sharing the warmth of her body against the encroaching chill of the night. The twins, who had been cast out by the world of men, had been found by the wilderness. Under the watchful eyes of the ancient gods and the silent gaze of the moon, they nestled against their new mother. She curled her powerful body around the small basket, a living shield against the dangers of the night. She was Lupa, the she-wolf, and these were her sons. She would nurse them, she would protect them. She would raise them as her own in the secret safety of her den on the Palatine Hill. She did not know they were of royal blood, destined to build an empire. She only knew they were hers. And so, as the first stars pricked the velvet canvas of the night sky, a strange and sacred family settled down to sleep by the flowing waters of the Tiber. The she-wolf, the mother, watched over her two human sons, her heart full for the first time in a long, lonely season. The cries that had echoed across the riverbank were replaced by the gentle rhythm of three hearts beating as one. The legend had begun. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of our epic tale. It is a story that truly shows how love and destiny can be found in the most unexpected of places. If you enjoyed this, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss what happens next. See you in the next video. Deep within the ancient heart of Rome, nestled at the foot of the Palatine Hill, lies a place whispered about in legends, a sanctuary cradled by myth itself. This is the Lupercalia, the wolf's den, the mythic cave where the story of Rome truly begins. Let us journey back, not with the clash of swords or the roar of a crowd, but with the quiet breath of survival, into the sacred darkness of this grotto. Imagine stepping from the bright Italian sun into the cool, earthy embrace of the cave. The air inside is still and heavy with the scent of damp soil, wet stone, and something else. Something wild and ancient. Light struggles to pierce the gloom, filtering through a tangle of fig tree roots that hang from the ceiling like grasping fingers, painting shifting patterns on the rugged walls. This isn't a place of grand architecture, but of raw, natural power. The silence is profound, broken only by the gentle drip of water seeping through the rock, each drop a note in a timeless melody. Here, in this protected hollow, the abandoned twins, Romulus and Remus, found their unlikely salvation. Their cries, which had echoed unanswered along the banks of the Tiber, were finally heard. Not by a human, but by a creature of the wild. A she-wolf, drawn by a primal instinct, discovered them. Look closer, into the deepest shadows of the cave. See her form, a powerful silhouette of muscle and fur. Her eyes are not fierce, but filled with a strange, maternal light as she gazes upon the helpless infants. There was no fear in this den, only a nascent bond forged in the crucible of necessity. The twins, small and fragile, were not prey. They were pups to be protected. Picture them nestled against her flank, felt the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest with each breath, a steady, living anchor in their uncertain world. Her breath, warm and carrying the scent of the forest, would have been the first comfort they knew, a gentle puff of life against their cold skin. The warmth of her fur was their first blanket, a thick, coarse coat that insulated them from the chill of the stone floor. Imagine their tiny hands instinctively curling into that dense fur, finding not just warmth, but security. It was a tactile connection, a primal reassurance that they were not alone. The she-wolf would have licked them clean with her rough tongue, her movements deliberate and soft, a gesture of ownership and care that transcended the boundary between species. In this hallowed space, the act of survival became a quiet ritual. The she-wolf would leave the cave to hunt, her paws silent on the forest floor, and return with sustenance. Not just for herself, but for the human children she had adopted. She would lie down, allowing them to nurse, to draw life from her. This was the miracle of the loop. A predator becoming a provider, a wild animal becoming a mother. The bond was unspoken, understood only in the language of shared warmth and mutual dependence. The days would have blended into one another, marked only by the shifting light at the cave's mouth. The world outside, with its politics, its dangers, and its human dramas, faded away. Inside the Lupercalia, the only reality was the soft panting of the wolf, the gurgling sounds of the feeding twins, and the profound peace of their shared existence. They were a family, bizarre and impossible, yet bound by the most powerful force in nature, the will to live and the instinct to protect the young. This cave, the Lupercalia, is more than just a setting in a myth. It is a symbol of Rome's own origins. It speaks of a city born not from opulence and design, but from resilience, from a wild and untamed spirit. It suggests that at the very core of this great empire there is a memory of a time when survival depended on the kindness of a beast, when the future founders were nurtured by the raw, untamed heart of nature itself. The air in the Lupercalia was a mixture of life and earth. It was the scent of the she-wolf's fur, the smell of milk, the coolness of stone, and the fragrance of the sacred fig tree. It was the atmosphere of Rome's infancy, a primal soup from which an empire would crawl. The bond formed in that darkness was the first alliance, the first pact that would define the Roman spirit of tenacity and opportunism. As the boys grew stronger, the cave would have become their playground. They would have tumbled and played under the watchful eyes of their wolf mother, their laughter echoing off the ancient stones, a sound of pure, unadulterated life. They learned not the language of men, but the language of the wild, the shift of the wind, the scent of rain, the call of a distant bird. They learned strength from their mother's example, resilience from their environment, and a deep-seated connection to the land that would one day be their city. This chapter of their lives, spent in the soft, dark womb of the earth, was a period of quiet incubation. It was here, in the Lupercalia, that the seeds of greatness were sown, watered by the milk of a wolf and warmed by her breath. Before they were kings or founders, they were simply children of the cave, brothers in survival, forever marked by the gentle wildness of their first home. The bond of the Lupercal was not just about food and warmth. It was a spiritual imprinting, a forging of character in the quiet furnace of a mythic den. It was a soft, slow beginning to a story that would one day thunder across the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of Roman myth. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more of the legends that shaped our world, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue to bring these ancient tales to life. We'll see you in the next chapter. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the legendary founding of Rome. Last time, we left the twin boys, Romulus and Remus, miraculously saved from the Tiber River and being nursed by a she-wolf in a sacred cave. It's a powerful, almost mythical image, isn't it? But a she-wolf, no matter how maternal, can only do so much. The boys needed human care to truly survive and thrive. And that, my friends, is where our story takes a turn, bringing a humble shepherd into the heart of this epic tale. This is the story of Faustulus, a simple man, a royal shepherd in the service of King Aemilius himself. His days were spent under the vast Italian sky, tending to the king's flocks on the slopes of the Palatine Hill. It was a life of routine, governed by the rising and setting of the sun, the needs of his sheep, and the changing of the seasons. Little did he know, one ordinary day was about to become the most extraordinary day of his life. As Faustulus followed his flock near the banks of the Tiber, he heard something unusual. It wasn't the bleating of a lamb or the call of a bird. It was a sound that didn't belong in the wilderness. The distinct cry of human babies. Puzzled and perhaps a little wary, he followed the sound, his shepherd's crook held tight. The cries led him towards the ficus, ruminalis, the sacred fig tree, and to the entrance of the Lupercal cave. What he saw there must have stopped him in his tracks. There, at the mouth of the cave, were two healthy, robust baby boys, gurgling and cooing, and beside them, calmly watching over them, was the she-wolf. Now, any other man might have run in fear. A wolf, especially one with cubsor in this case, human infants would be ferociously protective. But Faustulus was a man of the countryside. He understood the rhythms of nature, and what he saw wasn't a threat. He saw a miracle. He saw a motherly animal that had defied its nature to protect two abandoned human children. He waited patiently until the she-wolf had finished nursing the infants and loped back into the deeper woods to hunt. With his heart pounding in his chest, Faustulus cautiously approached. The boys looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. They were clearly well fed and cared for, a testament to their lupine guardian. But they were still human, and they needed a human family. Without a second thought, Faustulus gently gathered the two infants in his arms. He knew he couldn't leave them there. Whether it was divine intervention or simple human compassion, he felt a profound responsibility for these two lives. Carefully wrapping them in his cloak, he made his way back to his small, rustic hut on the hill. Waiting for him was his wife, Acca Larentia. Imagined her surprise when her husband, who had left that morning to tend sheep, returned carrying two babies. Faustulus explained the incredible scene he had witnessed: the river, the basket, the she-wolf, the cave. He told her everything. Acca Larentia, a kind and practical woman, didn't hesitate. Like her husband, she saw this not as a burden, but as a gift. Some say the couple had longed for a child of their own, and now the gods, or fate, had delivered two into their arms. They named the boys Romulus and Remus, and decided to raise them as their own sons, hiding their true, and potentially dangerous, origins from the world. Now, there's a fascinating and slightly scandalous layer to Acca Larentia's story. While many accounts portray her as a simple, virtuous shepherd's wife, other Roman historians offer a different take. They whisper that lupa, the Latin word for she-wolf, was also a common slang term for a prostitute. In these versions of the legend, Acca Larentia might not have been a literal shepherd's wife, but a woman of a certain reputation. This has led to a fascinating historical debate. Was the she-wolf who raised the boys a literal animal, a symbol of Rome's wild and untamed origins? Or was it a euphemism for a human woman Perhaps Acalarencia herself, nicknamed the She-Wolf, for her profession. This ambiguity is part of what makes the legend so rich. The idea of a human she-wolf raising the founders of Rome adds a layer of gritty realism to the myth. It grounds the story, suggesting that Rome's beginnings were not just divinely ordained, but also rooted in the common, and sometimes marginalized, people of the land. Whether she was a simple shepherd's wife, or the lupa of local gossip, Acca Larentia, alongside Faustulus, provided the love and stability the boys needed. So, under the loving care of their adoptive parents, Romulus and Remus grew up. They weren't raised in a palace surrounded by luxury. They were raised as shepherds. They learned the land, the sky, and the ways of the wild. Their playground was the 7 hills of their future city. They were strong, hardy, and fearless, their royal blood mixing with the rustic, practical upbringing of the countryside. They learned to hunt, to fight, and to lead not courtiers, but the other young shepherds of the area. They grew into natural leaders, charismatic and bold. They defended the flocks from wild animals and fought off bandits who tried to prey on the local shepherds. They were protectors of the common folk, forming a band of loyal followers from the youths on the hills. They had no idea they were princes, grandsons of the rightful king. They simply knew they were brothers, sons of Faustulus and Acca Larentia, and leaders of their small community. But fate, as we know, has a long memory. The secret of their birth couldn't stay hidden forever. The qualities that made them natural leaders also drew attention. Their noble bearing and innate authority couldn't be completely disguised by a shepherd's cloak. As they grew into manhood, the stage was being set for a dramatic confrontation, a rediscovery of their true identity, and the fulfillment of a prophecy that would change the course of history. The boys who were raised by wolves and shepherds were destined for a far greater purpose than just tending flocks. They were destined to build a city, an empire, and that's where we'll leave it for today. The boys are now strong young men, unaware of the throne that is rightfully theirs. What happens when the past comes knocking? Join us next time as we delve into the conflict, the revelation, and the fateful first steps towards the founding of Rome. Thanks so much for watching and sharing in this incredible story with me. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do you want to forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the myths of history and legend. Last time, we left 2 infant boys, Romulus and Remus, miraculously saved from the Tiber River and nurtured by a she-wolf. But their story is far from over. Today, we delve into Chapter 8, The Boys of the Hills, where we witnessed how these abandoned princes grew into legendary figures among the rugged shepherds of ancient Italy. So, what happened after the she? The story goes that a royal shepherd named Faustulus, who tended the king's flocks, discovered the infants in the wolf's den. Now, you have to imagine his surprise. Finding 2 healthy babies being cared for by a wild animal must have felt like an omen, a sign from the gods. Faustulus, a kind-hearted man, couldn't just leave them there. He carefully gathered the boys and brought them home to his wife, Acca Larentia. They raised the twins as their own, naming them Romulus and Remus. And so, the boys who were born in a palace found their home in a humble shepherdess hut on the slopes of the Palatine Hill. They grew up not with the soft comforts of royalty, but with the earth under their feet and the sky as their ceiling. Their playmates weren't other children of nobility. They were the lambs, the dogs, and the other shepherd boys. Life in the hills was tough. It was a world away from the political intrigue of Albalanga. Here, strength wasn't measured by titles or lineage, but by how fast you could run, how well you could track a wild boar, or how bravely you could defend the flock from predators. And in this environment, Romulus and Remus didn't just survive. They thrived. From a young age, it was clear they were different. They were taller, stronger, and quicker than any of the other boys. There was an air about them, a natural authority that made others look to them for leadership. They weren't bullies, though this wasn't the kind of power that comes from fear. Instead, it was born from courage and a deep-seated sense of justice. As they grew into young men, their days were filled with activity. They weren't idle. They were hunters, trackers, and guardians. They would lead hunting parties into the dense forests, their skills so sharp they rarely came back empty-handed. They learned the language of the wilderness, the tracks of animals, the signs of changing weather. This constant struggle against nature honed their bodies and sharpened their minds. But it wasn't just about hunting game. The hills and forests were also home to dangers of a different kind. Bands of robbers often preyed on the hard-working shepherds, stealing their livestock and terrorizing their families. While many shepherds would simply endure these attacks, feeling powerless, Romulus and Remus refused to stand by. They saw injustice, and they acted. They began to organize the other young shepherds into a defensive force. It wasn't a formal army, but a brotherhood united by a common purpose, to protect their own. Romulus and Remus were the natural commanders of this group. Their strategies were clever, and their courage was contagious. They would ambush the robbers, fighting with a ferocity that stunned their opponents. More importantly, whatever they recovered from the thieves' stolen, sheep, goods, or money they didn't hoard for themselves, they divided it fairly among all the shepherds, especially those who had suffered the greatest losses. This is where their reputation truly began to solidify. They weren't just strong. They weren't just leaders. They were protectors. Imagine the scene. A group of young men, hardened by the sun and the wind, led by two brothers who seemed almost larger than life. They were a beacon of hope for the common folk. In a world where the powerful often exploited the weak, Romulus and Remus stood as defenders of the underdog. They became local heroes, their names whispered with respect and admiration in the small communities dotting the hills. The tales of their exploits spread. People would talk about the time they outsmarted a notorious bandit leader or the time they tracked a pack of wolves that had been decimating the flocks and drove them from the territory. They were seen as favored by the gods, embodying the virtues of strength, leadership, and, above all, justice. This period of their lives was crucial. It was their training ground. They weren't learning statecraft in a palace. They were learning leadership in the field. They weren't studying laws from ancient scrolls. They were dispensing justice with their own hands. This practical, grassroots experience shaped them into the men they would become. They understood the struggles of the common person because they lived them. Interestingly, this lifestyle also revealed their different personalities. Romulus was often seen as the more thoughtful and strategic one, the planner. Remus was more impulsive, quick to act, and fiery in his passions. Together, they were a perfect team, their skills and temperaments complementing each other. They were inseparable, their bond forged in the shared challenges of their youth. Little did they know that their lineage was royal. They believed themselves to be the sons of a simple shepherd. They had no idea that the blood of kings and gods flowed through their veins. They were content with their life, leading their band of loyal followers, protecting the innocent, and carving out a name for themselves through their own deeds, not through any inherited title. But fate, as we know, has a funny way of circling back. The same hills where they became heroes were about to become the stage for a conflict that would change their lives forever. Their reputation for disrupting the local robbers had made them enemies, and one of these feuds would soon escalate, triggering a chain of events that would unravel the secret of their birth and set them on a path toward their incredible destiny. Their upbringing among the shepherds wasn't just a chapter in their life. It was the foundation of everything that was to come. It taught them that true nobility isn't about birthright, but about character. It showed them that leadership is earned through action, not given. These boys of the hills were being molded, prepared for a destiny far grander than they could ever have imagined. The founding of a city that would one day rule the world, and that's where we'll leave it for today. The stage is set, our heroes are ready, and the secrets of the past are waiting to be revealed. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible story. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Until next time, stay curious. The pastoral tranquility that had defined their lives was about to be shattered. Romulus and Remus, now young men, strong and respected among the shepherds, found their leadership tested not by wolves, but by the servants of King Numitor, the rightful ruler of Albalanga, now living in quiet exile. A fierce dispute erupted over grazing lands. The shepherds, loyal to Numitor, clashed with the followers of the twins. In the heat of the conflict, as tempers flared and blows were exchanged, Remus, ever the more impulsive of the two, was overpowered and captured. He was dragged away, a prisoner bound for Alba Longa, to face the judgment of a king he didn't know was his own grandfather. Romulus was frantic. The capture of his brother, his other half, lit a fire of desperation within him. He rallied their band of shepherds, his mind racing, planning a rescue. But Faustulus, the old shepherd who had raised them, saw the storm gathering and knew the time for secrets was over. He pulled Romulus aside, his face etched with a gravity the young man had never seen before. "Romulus," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "before you rush into the lion's den, there is something you must know, a truth I have guarded since the day I found you and your brother by the river." Faustulus then recounted the incredible story. He told of the basket washed ashore, the she-wolf, and the two infants he and his wife Laurentia had taken as their own. He spoke of the rumors that swirled around Alba Longa years ago of King Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, who had given birth to twin sons. He spoke of the cruel king Amulius Numitor's brother, who had seized the throne and, fearing a prophecy that his grandnephews would one day overthrow him, had ordered the infants to be cast into the Tiber river. He presented the final, undeniable proof: the finely woven trough, the very vessel in which they had been abandoned, which he had kept hidden all these years. The world tilted on its axis. For Romulus, he was not the son of a simple shepherd. He was the grandson of a king, the son of a god, and his veins pulsed with royal blood. The anger he felt for his brother's capture was now magnified 1,000 times, forged into a righteous fury. This was not just a squabble over pasture. It was a matter of destiny, of a stolen throne and a family torn apart by treachery. His personal quest to save Remus had now become a mission to reclaim their birthright. He was no longer just a leader of shepherds. He was a prince of Alba Longa. Meanwhile, in Alba Longa, Remus was brought before a man he assumed was the ruling king. But instead of the usurper Amulius, he stood before the gentle, sorrowful eyes of Numitor. The old king questioned the bold young shepherd who had dared to raid his lands. As Remus spoke, his bearing proud and defiant, even in captivity, Numitor was struck by his noble features and commanding presence. He saw an echo of his own youth, a phantom of the daughter he had lost. The age of the young man, the circumstances of his capture, it all began to click into place with the long-buried whispers of two lost grandsons. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, began to stir in Numitor's heart. He asked Remus about his origins, about his brother, as Remus told a story of being found by a river and raised by a shepherd. Numitor's suspicion turned to astonishing certainty. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. This young man, this captive, was his own flesh and blood. Just as this revelation dawned, a breathless messenger arrived, bearing news from the countryside. He spoke of Romulus, gathering an army of shepherds, preparing to march on the city, and he spoke of the story spreading like wildfire, that the twins were the sons of Rhea Silvia, grandsons of Numitor, come to reclaim their legacy. The secret was out. At that very moment, Romulus and his makeshift army arrived at the gates of Alba Longa. But they did not storm the city with brute force. Romulus, guided by a newfound strategic wisdom, divided his men. He entered the city quietly, telling his followers to regroup at the palace from different directions, avoiding a direct confrontation with the king's guards. He was not a barbarian invader. He was a returning prince. Inside the palace, Numitor revealed the truth to a stunned Remus. Grandfather and grandson were reunited, their identities confirmed, their purposes aligned. Remus, no longer a prisoner, was now a key player in the unfolding coup. He rallied support from within the palace, his charisma winning over guards and servants who had long chafed under Amulius's tyrannical rule. The city was thrown into chaos. Romulus's forces converged on the palace from the outside, while Remus's sympathizers rose up from within. Amulius, caught completely by surprise, found himself trapped. His power, built on fear and deceit, crumbled in a matter of hours. The people of Alba Longa, hearing the incredible story of the twins' survival and return, turned against the usurper they had long despised. There was no grand battle, no prolonged siege. The fight was swift and decisive. Romulus fought his way through the dwindling loyalists, his eyes set on one man. He confronted his great-uncle, the man who had tried to murder him as a baby, the man who had stolen his family's throne. In the heart of the palace, the final confrontation took place, and the reign of the usurper, Amulius, ended as quickly as it had begun. With Amulius defeated, the twins stood victorious. They sought out their grandfather and, in a public assembly, proclaimed Numitor as the rightful king of Alba once more. A roar of approval went up from the crowd. The city celebrated the restoration of the true royal line and the heroism of the twin grandsons who had appeared as if from a myth. They had left their quiet life as shepherds and, in a single whirlwind day, had reclaimed a kingdom. But their own story, their shared destiny, was far from over. Alba was their past, their birthright reclaimed. But the future, a new city they were destined to found, awaited them. Their greatest adventures were still to come. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through myth and history. The story of Romulus and Remus is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we continue their epic tale. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the legends of ancient Rome. When we last left our twin heroes, Romulus and Remus, they had just learned the stunning truth of their royal lineage. They weren't just shepherds. They were the grandsons of Numitor, the rightful king of Alba, and the sons of the god Mars, and the priestess, Rhea Silvia. Their entire lives, raised in the wild by a she-wolf, and then by the kind shepherd Faustulus, had been built on a lie, orchestrated by their great-uncle. Now, armed with this earth-shattering revelation, the fire of justice burned in their hearts. It wasn't just about personal vengeance anymore. It was about destiny. It was about restoring honor to their family and freeing a kingdom from the grip of a tyrant. The prophecy that spoke of Mars' twin sons returning to claim their birthright was no longer a whispered myth. It was a living, breathing reality, and Romulus and Remus were its instruments. The brothers knew they couldn't storm the palace of Alba alone. Amulius was a cunning and ruthless ruler, protected by loyal guards and the formidable walls of the city he had stolen. A direct assault would be suicide. So, they did what they did best. They rallied the people who knew and trusted them. They returned to the hills and forests, not as simple shepherds, but as leaders. They spoke to the other shepherds, the farmers, the hunters all, the common folk who had suffered under Amulius's oppressive reign. Their words were filled with passion and truth. They shared their incredible story, the tale of their miraculous survival, their divine parentage, and the great injustice done to their grandfather. As they spoke, the people saw not just two young men, but the embodiment of hope. They saw the strength of Mars in their eyes and the dignity of their royal blood in their bearing. The discontent that had been simmering for years among the people of Alba finally had a focal point. A rebellion was brewing, not in the gilded halls of the palace, but in the humble pastures and fields of the common man. Their plan was audacious and brilliant. They would not march on the city as a single, easily defeated army. Instead, they would divide and conquer. Romulus would lead one group of armed shepherds, their hunting spears and rustic tools now weapons of liberation. He would approach Alba from one direction, creating a diversion, drawing the attention of Amulius's guards. Meanwhile, Remus, with another band of loyal followers, would use his knowledge of the city's hidden paths and forgotten entrances to sneak inside the palace walls. A silent, deadly force. As Romulus and his followers made their presence known outside the city gates, chaos erupted. The city guards, accustomed to peace and the occasional petty squabble, were unprepared for such an organized and ferocious-looking group. Shouts and the clash of metal echoed through the air as Amulius's soldiers rushed to meet the perceived threat. This was the moment Remus had been waiting for. Under the cover of the ensuing confusion, he and his men slipped through a poorly guarded postern gate, the very one their mother, Rhea Silvia, might have passed through years ago. They moved through the palace corridors like ghosts, their shepherd's instincts making them silent and swift. They knew their target. The throne room, where Amulius, arrogant and secure, would be directing his troops. Along the way, they met other palace servants and guards who secretly remained loyal to Numitor. Seeing the determined faces of the twins' followers, they either stepped aside or quietly joined their cause, swelling their numbers. The tide was turning from within. Inside the throne room, King Amulius was barking orders, confident that the shepherd uprising would be crushed easily. He was so focused on the external threat that he failed to notice the danger brewing right behind him. The doors to the throne room burst open, and Remus stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. Before Amulius could even react, Remus and his men were upon him. The king, who had lived by the sword, now faced his end by it. The guards who remained loyal to him were quickly overwhelmed. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. The reign of the usurper was over. With Amulius defeated, Romulus and his men entered the city, not as invaders, but as liberators. The citizens of Alba Longa poured into the streets, cheering for the twin heroes who had freed them. Their first act was not to claim the throne for themselves, but to honor their family and the rightful line of succession. They went to the place where their grandfather Numitor had been held in quiet disgrace. Some say imprisoned, others say under a form of house arrest. Imagine that reunion. Numitor, an old man who had lost his kingdom, his son, and believed his grandsons to be dead, suddenly seeing these two powerful young men before him. Faustulus, the shepherd, was there to confirm their identity, presenting the very basket in which they had been found floating on the Tiber. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Tears of joy and disbelief streamed down the old king's face. He embraced his long-lost grandsons, the boys who had defied death and a tyrant to restore his honor. The people of Alba Longa gathered in the main forum, and there, Romulus and Remus presented their grandfather to the crowd. They recounted the entire story of Amulius's treachery and proclaimed Numitor as the one and only true king. A great cheer rose from the assembly, a sound of pure joy and relief that echoed through the 7 hills. Numitor, with his grandsons at his side, ascended the steps to the throne he had lost so many years ago. Justice had been served. The prophecy was fulfilled, but for Romulus and Remus, this victory was not an end, but a beginning. They had restored their grandfather to power, but they were young men filled with ambition and a sense of destiny that couldn't be contained within the old walls of Alba Longa. They were leaders of men, sons of a god, and founders of a new generation. They had tasted leadership and felt the pulse of building something new. Remaining in Alba Longa as princes, second in command, was not their fate. Their journey was far from over. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but their own personal legend was just beginning to be written. They looked out from the walls of Alba Longa towards the Tiber River, towards the very place where their lives had been saved. A new city was calling to them, a city they would build themselves, a city that would one day rule the world. And it was in the founding of this new city that their bond as brothers would face its greatest and most tragic test. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of our story. The fall of Amulius is a pivotal moment, but what comes next will shape the course of history forever. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in the epic tale of Romulus and Remus. See you next time. Hello and welcome back to our journey through history's most epic tales. Last time, we left our heroes, Romulus and Remus, victorious. They had unseated a tyrant, restored their grandfather to the throne, and reclaimed their rightful heritage. But for men touched by destiny, simply going back to the old ways is never enough. The fire of ambition, kindled in the wild hills of their youth, now burned brighter than ever. They had tasted freedom, leadership, and the thrill of forging their own path. The quiet life of a prince in Alba Longa, however comfortable, felt like a cage. Their hearts longed for the rugged landscape that had shaped them. The 7 hills overlooking the winding Tiber River. It was more than just a place. It was the cradle of their survival, the stage of their miraculous rescue. It was home, and so, an idea as grand and audacious as the twins themselves began to take shape. Why serve in a city built by others when they could create their own? Why follow old traditions when they could establish new ones? They wouldn't just build a settlement. They would found a city, a beacon of their legacy, a testament to their divine favor. And where else to build this future metropolis but on the very ground where their story began? They envisioned a city rising from the Palatine Hill, the sacred spot where the she-wolf had found them, where Faustulus had taken them in. It was a place steeped in personal history and divine significance. The land itself was a promise, a foundation blessed by the gods. The decision was made with a band of loyal followers, shepherds, adventurers, and others who yearned for a new start. Romulus and Remus returned to the banks of the Tiber. They looked upon the untamed land, not as a wilderness, but as a blank canvas. Here, they would build their future. Here, they would lay the first stones of a city that would, one day, rule the world. But this new beginning, this shared dream, held the seeds of a future conflict. When two leaders, both equally ambitious and strong-willed, set out to build a single city, who truly gets to lead? Who gets to name it? Who gets to draw its sacred boundaries? The dream of unity was powerful, but the undercurrents of sibling rivalry ran deep. Imagine the scene. Two brothers, bound by blood and a shared, miraculous past, standing on a hill overlooking the river. They are surrounded by men who believe in their vision. The air is thick with hope and excitement. They're on the cusp of creating something monumental. Yet, in their hearts, a silent question lingers, a question that will soon demand an answer. How do you share a destiny meant for one? The ground they chose was rich with symbolism. The Palatine Hill, where the she-wolf's den lay, would be the heart of their new world. The other hills, the Capitoline, the Aventine, the Celian, were like sleeping giants, waiting to be awakened and incorporated into their grand design. The Tiber River, which had once carried them to their fate, would now be their city's lifeblood, a gateway for trade and a natural defense. They weren't just building with stone and timber. They were building with a myth. Every choice was deliberate. Every location held meaning. This wasn't just a practical decision to found a new settlement. It was a deeply spiritual and personal quest. They were reclaiming the land that had saved them and consecrating it as the foundation of their legacy. Their followers were a motley crew, a perfect reflection of the twins' own upbringing. They weren't the polished nobility of Alba Longa. They were rough-hewn shepherds who knew the land, runaway servants seeking freedom, and second sons with no inheritance to look forward to. They were people who had nothing to lose and a new world to gain. In Romulus and Remus, they saw not just leaders, but kindred spirits. This energy, this raw, untamed potential, would become the very character of Rome itself. It would be a city built by outsiders, a place of opportunity, a magnet for the ambitious and the disenfranchised. From its very inception, it was destined to be different from the ancient, aristocratic cities that surrounded it. As they began to survey the land and make their initial plans, the differences in their personalities became more apparent. Romulus, perhaps the more serious and traditionally pious of the two, was focused on the sacred rites, the proper auguries, and establishing a clear, ordered structure. Remus, ever the challenger, the one who jumped over walls rather than walking through gates, was more impulsive, more eager to get started, and perhaps a little less concerned with the rigid traditions his brother held so dear. Their shared dream was about to face its first and most critical test. Founding a city is more than just laying bricks. It's about establishing law, order, and, most importantly, a single, ultimate authority. For two brothers who had been equals their entire lives, the idea that one must now submit to the other was unthinkable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the ages. A new beginning had been declared. The foundation for a great city was chosen. But the question of its founder, its king, and its name remained unanswered. The very act of creation would force a choice, and that choice would lead to a tragedy that would forever stain the glorious story of Rome. Their new beginning was also the beginning of the end for their brotherhood. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of the story. The founding of a city is a monumental task, but for the twins, it's about to become a battle for supremacy. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. See you in the next video. Friends, welcome back. Last time, we left Romulus and Remus with a grand vision, a shared dream of building a city that would echo through the ages. They had returned to their homeland, the place where they were saved by the she-wolf, with a band of loyal followers and the blessing of King Num. Everything seemed perfect, a storybook ending in the making. But as anyone who's ever started a big project knows, the first step is often the hardest. And for our twin brothers, that first step would become a chasm that threatened to swallow their dream whole. The question was simple, yet monumental. Where should they lay the first stone? This wasn't just about picking a nice spot with a good view. This was about choosing the very heart of their future empire. The land around the Tiber was a patchwork of hills, each with its own character and strategic advantages. And right away, the brothers found themselves on opposite sides of the debate. Romulus, ever the pragmatist, the one who had perhaps spent more time considering the long-term logistics of leadership, set his sights on the Palatine Hill. From a purely practical standpoint, it was a brilliant choice. The Palatine was a natural fortress. Its steep sides made it easy to defend, and its broad, flat top was perfect for laying out a city. It offered a commanding view of the surrounding landscape, including the crucial ford across the Tiber. The Forum Boreum: control the Palatine, and you'll control the trade routes, the river, and the very lifeline of the region. Romulus saw a city built for strength, for commerce, for dominance. He envisioned walls, temples, and a bustling forum, all safe and secure on this mighty hill. For him, it was a decision of the head, a logical and strategic move. Remus, however, was guided by something different. Perhaps it was his more impulsive, passionate nature. He was drawn to the Aventine Hill. The Aventine was beautiful, lush, and offered its own stunning vistas. It felt ... right to him. Maybe it was a gut feeling, an emotional pull towards its wilder, more untamed beauty. He argued that it was just as defensible and offered more space for future expansion. But for Remus, this was a decision of the heart. The Aventine called to his spirit, and he couldn't imagine building their shared dream anywhere else. He saw a city built for people, for life, a place of beauty and spirit. The friendly debate quickly turned serious. Their followers, who had come with them from Alba, started to take sides. The camp became divided. Tere Werete Palatines and the Aventines. Arguments broke out over campfires. What was once a united group, bound by a shared purpose, was now fractured by this fundamental disagreement. The brothers, who had faced down assassins and overthrown a king together, now stood looking at each other across a divide of their own making. They argued for days. Romulus would point to the strategic superiority of the Palatine, mapping out defensive positions and trade advantages in the dirt. Remus would counter by speaking of the spirit of the Aventine, the inspiration it offered, the better connection to the river gods. Neither would budge. Their bond, forged in a wolf's den and tempered by a shared destiny, was showing its first real cracks. They loved each other, there was no doubt, but they were also proud and stubborn men, each utterly convinced that he was right. The city they dreamed of was meant to be their shared legacy, but how could they build it together if they couldn't even agree on where to begin? As the tension mounted, they realized that logic and emotion were not enough to solve this impasse. In the ancient world, when mortals reached a deadlock, there was one final court of appeal. The gods. They agreed to settle the dispute through augury, a sacred ritual of divination. They would each seek a sign from the heavens. The gods would decide. It was a common practice, a way to place an unsolvable problem into the hands of a higher power. They would each go to their chosen hill, perform the necessary rites, and watch the sky for a sign, typically a flight of sacred birds. Whichever brother received the more favorable omen would win the right to name and found the city. It seemed like a fair solution, a way to end the argument without either brother having to concede defeat to the other. They would let fate, or the will of Jupiter, guide them. So, as dawn broke on a fateful day, the two brothers separated. The festive atmosphere of their return had evaporated, replaced by a tense and somber silence. This was no longer just about a hill. It was about who would lead. The augury was a contest, now, a divine test of legitimacy. Remus ascended the Aventine Hill, his heart a mixture of hope and anxiety. He found a clear spot, prepared a small, sacred space, and turned his eyes to the sky, waiting. He was the first to see a sign. A breathtaking sight. 6 magnificent vultures, powerful messengers of the gods, soared into view, circling high above. A wave of triumph washed over him. 6, a clear and powerful number. Surely, this was the sign. He immediately sent a messenger racing to the Palatine to tell Romulus of his victory. The gods had chosen the Aventine. The gods had chosen him. But as Remus's messenger was scrambling down the hill, an even more dramatic sign appeared to Romulus on the Palatine. As he stood, patient and resolute, a shadow fell over him. He looked up, and there, appearing as if from nowhere, were not 6, but 12 vultures. Double the number. An unambiguously superior omen. The message from the heavens seemed undeniable. While Remus had received a strong sign, Romulus had received one that was twice as powerful. And here, the seeds of tragedy were sown. Who had truly won? Remus saw his sign first. In a race, the first to cross the line wins. He argued that the timing of the omen was what mattered. The gods had spoken to him first, therefore his claim was the primary one. But Romulus and his followers scoffed at this. Quantity overrules priority, they argued. 12 is clearly better than 6. It's not about who saw them first, but who saw the most magnificent sign. A blessing of 12 vultures was a divine declaration of absolute favor. The augury, which was meant to solve their dispute, had only made it 1,000 times worse. It hadn't given them a clear answer. It had given them 2 competing answers, each with its own compelling logic. Now, it wasn't just Romulus's opinion versus Remus's. It was Romulus's divine sign versus Remus's divine sign. Both brothers felt justified. Both felt chosen. The division was no longer about a piece of land. It was about divine right. Their followers, already divided, now clung to their chosen leader with religious fervor. The Palatines hailed Romulus as the divinely appointed founder. The Aventines insisted that Remus's earlier sign gave him precedence. The air crackled with hostility. The dream of a united city was dissolving into the reality of 2 armed camps, each led by a brother who believed the gods were on his side. They had sought clarity from the heavens, but instead received a prophecy of conflict. The disagreement over a hill had escalated into a fight for legitimacy, blessed, or so each believed, by the gods themselves. The stage was set for a final, terrible confrontation. What happens when 2 chosen ones, 2 brothers, bound by fate, find that their destinies are on a collision course? We're about to find out. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of the journey. The story is reaching its most critical point, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when the next chapter drops. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of history, where myths and legends forge the foundations of empires. Today, we arrive at a moment shrouded in shadow and sorrow, a turning point that would forever define the destiny of Rome. This is the story of a bond broken by ambition, of brotherhood sacrificed at the altar of a city yet to be born. This is the fatal rivalry of Romulus and Remus. Imagine the scene. The Palatine Hill, bathed in the golden light of an Italian sun. The air, once filled with the shared dreams and laughter of 2 brothers, now hangs heavy with unspoken tension. Romulus, driven by the divine augury of the 12 vultures, had begun his sacred task. With a bronze plowshare, pulled by a white bull and a white cow, he carved a furrow into the earth, tracing the boundary of his future city. This was the asterisk, P-O-M-E-R-I-U-M asterisk, a line not just of soil, but of divine and legal significance. Each clod of earth turned outward by the plow was carefully thrown back inside the furrow, symbolizing that the strength and nourishment of the city must come from within. Where gates were planned, Romulus lifted the plow, creating breaks in the sacred line, for a city must have passages for life to flow in and out. He was not just building a wall, he was performing a holy rite, weaving a tapestry of law, order, and divine favor. His hands were caked with dirt, his brow slick with sweat, but in his eyes burned the fire of a founder a king. Every stone he placed, every meter of wall he raised, was a testament to his vision. This was to be Rome, a city of permanence, a city of power, a city that would echo through eternity. The walls, though still low and humble, were, in his mind, already touching the heavens. They were a symbol of security, of civilization carved out of the wilderness, a promise of a future he was determined to command. He saw not just a rampart of earth and stone, but a bastion against chaos, a cradle for a new people. Meanwhile, Remus watched from the nearby Aventine Hill. His heart, once perfectly attuned to his brother's, now beat with a different rhythm of bitterness and envy. He had seen only 6 vultures, a powerful sign, but one eclipsed by his brother's 12. To Remus, Romulus's frenzied work on the Palatine was not a sacred act, but a monument to his own perceived failure. The rising walls did not signify safety. They represented his brother's ascendancy and his own exclusion. Each stone laid was a stone upon his pride. Each cheer from Romulus's followers, a jeer at his own diminished status. Doubt and resentment festered within him. Was this the same brother with whom he had shared a cradle, been suckled by the she-wolf, and overthrown a tyrannical king? Where was the boy who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him against every odd? He saw only a rival, a man who had claimed their shared destiny for himself. The laughter they once shared now seemed a distant, hollow echo. The bond, forged in the wilderness and tempered in battle, was beginning to crack under the immense pressure of their competing ambitions, unable to contain his simmering frustration any longer. Remus descended the avenue. He approached the construction site, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. His followers fell silent, sensing the impending storm. The air grew thick, charged with the electricity of a confrontation that had been brewing since the birds took flight. He walked along the freshly dug trench, his eyes scanning the low, almost pitiable walls. He saw not a nascent fortress, but a child's game, a pathetic mound of dirt. Is this the great wall that will protect your new city, brother? Remus's voice dripped with scorn, loud enough for all the workers to hear. He gestured dismissively at the rampart. It seems a rather flimsy defense. What enemy would be troubled by such a barrier? His words were daggers, aimed directly at the heart of Romulus's pride. He was not just questioning the wall. He was questioning Romulus's authority, his vision, his divine mandate. Romulus stopped his work, his hands clenched into fists, his face, flushed with exertion, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "This line is sacred, Remus," he warned, his voice low and guttural. "It is protected by the gods. To cross it unbidden is to invite their wrath." He was trying to appeal to their shared upbringing, to the reverence for divine law that had been instilled in them. He was giving his brother a chance to retreat, to honor the sanctity of the moment. But Remus was beyond reason, consumed by a need to belittle his brother's creation, to tear down the symbol of his own defeat. He laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the respectful silence. "Sacred? Your ditch is sacred." And then, with a final, fateful act of contempt, he took a running start. With a single, effortless leap, he jumped over the half-finished wall and landed inside the sacred boundary. It was the ultimate act of sacrilege. More than just a childish taunt, it was a profound violation. He had mocked the gods, defiled the sacred boundary, and publicly humiliated its founder. In that one leap, Remus had declared that his brother's laws, his city, and his divine right were meaningless. For Romulus, something inside snapped. The years of brotherhood, the shared history, the love had all evaporated in a blaze of incandescent rage. This was not his brother anymore. This was a traitor, a blasphemer, who threatened the very foundation of his life's work before it had even truly begun. The vision of the 12 vultures, the divine promise, the destiny of Romit, all seemed to hang in the balance, threatened by this single act of defiance. In that terrible, silent moment, Romulus saw only the threat. He saw the future of his city, his Rome, being mocked and undermined. The founder king eclipsed the brother, with a guttural roar that seemed to rise from the very earth he was consecrating. Romulus raised the heavy spade he held in his hand. He lunged forward. The tool, moments before an instrument of creation, became a weapon of destruction. He struck Remus down. The blow was swift, brutal, and final. Remus crumpled to the ground within the very walls he had just violated, the dust of the nascent city mingling with his lifeblood. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The impossible had happened. The unthinkable had been done. One of the twin sons of Mars, nursed by the she-wolf, lay dead at the hand of the other. As Remus lay dying, the fire of mockery in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a flicker of shock and, perhaps, regret. Romulus stood over him, his chest heaving, the spade still clutched in his trembling hand. The fury that had possessed him began to recede, replaced by the dawning, soul-crushing horror of his deed. The world seemed to fall away, the sounds of his followers fading into a dull roar. There was only the still form of his twin, his other half lying broken at his feet. The silence on the Palatine Hill was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind. The brotherly bond was not just broken, it was obliterated, drowned in a pool of fraternal blood. From this act of fratricide, this foundational crime, the city of Rome would be born. Its walls were now consecrated not only with sacred rites, but with the ultimate sacrifice. And as Romulus looked upon the brother he had slain, he uttered the chilling words that would echo through Roman history, a grim warning to all who would dare challenge his city. So perish all who ever leap over my walls. The dream of two brothers ruling together was dead. Now, only one king remained, his reign forever stained by the shadow of the brother he had killed. The tragedy was complete, and the legend of Rome had its dark, unforgettable beginning. Thank you for joining me for this poignant and powerful chapter in our story. The path of history is often paved with such difficult moments. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the ancient world. We'll see you next time. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our channel. Last time, we left the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, on the brink of a monumental decision. They had returned to the Tiber River, the very spot where their lives were spared as infants, with a shared vision to build a city. But as we know, even the grandest visions can be fractured by ambition. Today, we delve into the dramatic and ultimately tragic conclusion to their story and witness the birth of a city that would one day rule the known world. Rome. So, where do you build a city? For the twins, this wasn't just a question of logistics. It was a matter of divine will. They decided to let the gods choose the rightful founder and the perfect location through augury, the ancient practice of interpreting the flight of birds. Remus took his post on the Aventine Hill, while Romulus ascended the Palatine Hill. The tension must have been immense. Who would the gods favor? Suddenly, a cry from the Aventine. Remus had seen it first. 6 magnificent vultures circling in the sky. A clear sign. Or was it? Almost immediately after, on the Palatine, Romulus spotted a flock of his own. Not 6, but 12 vultures. Now, this sparked a fierce debate. Was the first sighting more important, or was the greater number the decisive factor? Remus's supporters argued for priority, while Romulus's camp insisted that double the number was an undeniable sign of superior divine favor. The dream of a shared city was already cracking under the strain of brotherly rivalry. Tragically, this argument didn't end with words. In a fit of mockery and defiance, Remus leaped over the half-finished wall that Romulus had begun to build on the Palatine Hill. This wasn't just a childish prank. It was a grave insult, a symbolic violation of the sanctity of the new city's boundaries. What happened next is shrouded in the mists of legend, but the outcome is undisputed. In a flash of rage, Romulus struck his brother down. Some accounts say Romulus himself delivered the fatal blow, declaring, "So perish all who ever leap over my walls." Others suggest it was one of his followers. Regardless of the exact hand that did it, the result was the same. Remus was dead, and the foundation of the new city was stained with fraternal blood. With his brother gone and his claim undisputed, Romulus stood as the sole founder. He completed the walls on the Palatine Hill and, drawing from his own name, called the new settlement Rome. On April 21st, 753 BC, according to tradition, The city of Rome was officially born. Romulus, the boy raised by a she-wolf, the survivor of a king's jealous plot, now wore a new title. He was Rome's first king. But a city is more than just walls and a name. It needs people. And early Rome had a serious population problem. It was a city of men. To solvetis Romulus declared Rome an asylum, a safe haven for anyone seeking a new start. Exiles, runaway servants, debtors, and all sorts of outcasts flocked to the new city, eager for the promise of a fresh life. The population boomed, but it was a lopsided community. There were warriors, farmers, and laborers, but very few women. And without women, there could be no families, no future generations, no legacy. Romulus knew he had to act. He first tried diplomacy, sending envoys to the neighboring tribes, like the Sabines, requesting the right of entry. He argued that cities, like people, start from humble beginnings and, with the help of the gods and their own virtue, can achieve greatness. But the neighbors were unimpressed. They looked down on this ragtag collection of men and scoffed at the idea of giving their daughters to them. They mockingly suggested they hold games for the gods, and maybe then some suitable wives would show up. They were essentially telling Romulus, "You and your city are a joke." This rejection was a deep insult, but it also gave Romulus a cunning and audacious idea. He announced a grand festival in honor of the god Neptune, complete with spectacular games and celebrations. He advertised it far and wide, and his neighbors, their curiosity piqued and their guard down, come in droves. Entire familias, including the Sabines, flocked to Rome, eager to see this upstart city and enjoy the festivities. The scene was set. The festival was in full swing, the visitors mesmerized by the chariot races. At a prearranged signal from Romulus, the Roman men sprang into action. They drew their swords, not to kill, but to create chaos. As panic erupted, each Roman seized an unmarried woman and carried her off. The visitors, unarmed and caught completely by surprise, could only flee in terror, their cries of betrayal echoing as they left their daughters and sisters behind. This infamous event would be known to history as the rape of the Sabine women. It's important to note that in this ancient context, the word rape refers to abduction or kidnapping, not the modern definition of the crime. Back in Rome, the abducted Sabine women were terrified and distraught. Romulus himself went from woman to woman, trying to calm their fears. He explained that this was not an act of aggression, but one of necessity, born from the pride and refusal of their own fathers. He promised them that they would not be treated as captives, but as respected wives and citizens of Rome. They would share in all the fortunes of the city, and their children would be the future of a great people. He urged them to accept their fate and open their hearts to the men who, out of desperation and passion, had made them their own. Over time, his words and the genuine respect shown by the Roman men began to soothe the women's anger. They accepted their new lives, and soon, families were formed and children were born. A fragile peace settled over Rome, but their fathers and brothers had not forgotten. The Sabine king, Titus Tatius, gathered his army and marched on Rome, determined to reclaim their women and avenge their honor. The war was fierce. The Sabines managed to capture the Capitoline Hill, one of Rome's most important strongholds, through the treachery of a Roman woman named Tarpeia. The two armies faced each other in the valley between the Capitoline and Palatine Hills, the future site of the Roman Forum. The fighting was bloody and desperate, with Romans and Sabines locked in a mortal struggle. Just as the battle reached its most critical point, a new force appeared on the field. The Sabine women, their hair undone in mourning, their hearts torn between their fathers and their husbands, ran into the thick of the fighting. With their children in their arms, they threw themselves between the clashing swords. They pleaded with their Sabine fathers and brothers on one side, and their Roman husbands on the other. "If you are angry at this alliance," they cried, "turn your anger on us. We are the cause of the war." They begged them not to stain themselves with the blood of their own family, not to make them widows and orphans in a single day. Their courageous act stunned both armies into silence. The soldiers, moved by this incredible display of love and desperation, lowered their weapons. The sight of their daughters and sisters, now mothers to Roman children, standing between them, extinguished the fires of their hatred. The leaders, Romulus and Titus, stepped forward. Instead of continuing the war, they made a peace treaty. But this was no ordinary truce. They agreed not just to end the fighting, but to unite their peoples into one. The Sabines would move to Rome, and Romulus and Titus would rule jointly as co. And so, through an act of shocking violence and an equally stunning act of reconciliation, the city of Rome doubled in size and strength. Romulus, the lone founder, now shared his power, and the foundation of his city was solidified not just by walls of stone, but by new bonds of kinship and a shared destiny. The dream of a great city was becoming a reality, forged in blood, ambition, and the unbreakable will of its people. The Roman Empire was still centuries away, but here, in this valley, its first, most crucial steps were taken. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey into Rome's foundation myth. It's a story that's as complex and challenging as it is epic. What do you think of Romulus's actions? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. And do you forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter in the story of Rome. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we arrive at a truly epic chapter. The she-wolf's legacy. For thousands of years, one creature has prowled the edges of human civilization, a symbol of both our deepest fears and our most profound strengths. The wolf, but it's the she-wolf, in particular, that holds a unique and powerful place in our collective story. Join me as we explore how this magnificent animal became an icon, a legend, and a legacy that endures to this day. Have you ever seen a statue and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on you? That's the feeling you get when you stand before the Capitoline wolf in Rome. This isn't just a bronze sculpture, it's a foundation myth cast in metal. It depicts the legendary she-wolf, who, against all odds, discovered and suckled the abandoned twins, Romulus and Remus. She is the wild, untamed mother of a future empire. Her fierce, protective gaze isn't just watching over two infants, it's watching over the birth of Rome itself. This single image, replicated countless times, tells a powerful story that even the greatest civilizations can have their origins in an act of wild, maternal compassion. It reminds us that strength doesn't always come from polished armor and sharp swords, but sometimes from the raw, instinctual nurturing of a mother. But the she-wolf's image wasn't just confined to static art. It was a dynamic, living symbol carried proudly into the heart of battle. Imagine the sight. Roman legions marching under their aquila, the eagle standard, but also alongside banners, or bearing the image of the lupa, the she-wolf. For the soldiers, this wasn't just a mascot. It was a reminder of their origins, their tenacity, their pack loyalty. Just like a wolf pack, a legion was a cohesive unit, a family bound by duty and survival. The she-wolf on their banners symbolized their connection to the very soil of Rome, a fierce, maternal spirit that they were fighting to protect. It was a promise that they would defend their home with the same ferocity that she defended her adopted sons. This symbol transformed from a myth into a living emblem of military identity and courage. As empires rose and fell, the story of the she-wolf didn't fade away. It evolved, it seeped into the folklore and hearts of cultures far beyond the borders of Italy. In many Native American traditions, the wolf is a teacher, a pathfinder, and a symbol of family and loyalty. The pack, led by the alpha pair, is a model of social harmony and cooperation. The she-wolf, in this context, is the heart of the pack, the wise matriarch who ensures its survival and teaches the young the ways of the world. She's a symbol of intelligence, instinct, and a deep connection to the natural world. This tells us that the power of the she-wolf transcends specific myths. It speaks to a universal human understanding of what it means to lead, to nurture, and to belong. Think about how often the term she-wolf is used today. It might describe a powerful female CEO, a fiercely protective mother, or a woman who carves her own path with unapologetic confidence. The name carries with it a legacy of strength, independence, and intuition. It's a testament to how an ancient symbol can remain so potent and relevant. We see echoes of the she-wolf in modern stories, from characters in our favorite books and films, to the real-life women who lead and inspire us. The she-wolf has become a shorthand for a type of femininity that is untamed, resilient, and utterly self. She is the leader of her own pack, guided by her own instincts. This legacy is so powerful because it bridges the gap between the wild and the civilized. The she-wolf represents the part of us that is still connected to nature, to instinct, to the untamed spirit. At the same time, she is the founder of cities, the protector of legacies, the heart of the family. She teaches us that wildness and civilization are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. We need both the structure of society and the untamed spirit of the individual to truly thrive. Her story is a reminder that our greatest strengths often come from embracing the very parts of ourselves that society might ask us to tame. When we look at the she-wolf in Bronze, we see our history. When we see her on a banner, we see our ambition. And when we feel her spirit remembered in our hearts, we connect with a timeless source of strength. She is the mother of outcasts who become kings, the wild spirit at the heart of the city, and the quiet leader who ensures the pack survives. Her legacy isn't just about wolves or about Rome. It's about the enduring power of maternal strength, the importance of instinct, and the wild, unbreakable spirit that lives within us all. It's a story of how an act of compassion in the wilderness could echo through eternity, shaping the world in ways no one could have ever predicted. The she-wolf's story is a beautiful paradox. She is an animal, yet she is the mother of humanity's greatest empire. She's a symbol of wildness, yet she is foundational to civilization. She is a solitary figure in the myth, yet she represents the ultimate bond of family and pack. Her legacy teaches us to look for strength in unexpected places, to honor our instincts, and to recognize the profound power of nurturing and protection. The she-wolf's howl doesn't just echo across ancient hills, it resonates in our modern world, a call to embrace our own strength, our own loyalty, and our own wild, beautiful legacy. She is a symbol not just of where we came from, but of the fierce, compassionate, and resilient beings we can all aspire to be. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the legacy of the she-wolf. It's a story that I find endlessly fascinating, and I hope you did too. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the symbols and stories that shape our world. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What does the she-wolf symbolize to you? Until next time, stay curious. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back to ancient Rome to uncover one of its most wild, ancient, and frankly, bizarre festivals. To Lupercalia. Forget Valentine's Day. This was the original February festival of love, but with a much more primal twist. So, grab your toga, and let's dive into the rituals of The name Lupercalia itself hints at its origins. It comes from lupus, the Latin word for wolf. This festival was deeply connected to the she-wolf, or Lupao, who, according to legend, suckled the abandoned twins Romulus and Remus, the future founders of Rome. This wasn't just a story, it was a foundational myth, and Lupercalia was its living, breathing reenactment. The festival honored not just the wolf, but also Faunus, a rustic Roman god of the forest, plains, and fields, often equated with the Greek god Pan. He was a protector of flocks and a bestower of fertility, which were central themes of the celebration. The festival kicked off on February 15th at a sacred cave on the Palatine Hill, called the Loop. This was believed to be the very spot where the she-wolf had nursed the twins. Inside this grotto, a special order of priests, the Loop, or Brothers of the Wolf, gathered to perform the opening rites. They were usually young men from noble families, chosen for this prestigious, albeit strange, duty. So, what happened in the cave? The ceremony began with a sacrifice. The Luperci would sacrifice one or more male goats, symbols of virility and sexuality, and a dog. The dog is an interesting choice. In the ancient world, dogs were seen as guardians, but also as animals that stood between the world of the living and the wild. Sacrificing a dog might have symbolized purifying the boundaries of the community and warding off evil spirits. After the sacrifice, the real theatrics began. Two young Luperci would be brought forward. A priest would touch their foreheads with the bloody sacrificial knife, and then immediately wipe the blood away with a piece of wool soaked in milk. The tradition dictated that upon having the blood wiped away, the two young men had to laugh out loud. This act is fascinating, and scholars have debated its meaning for centuries. Was it a ritual purification, a symbolic death and rebirth? The blood representing a brush with the wild, untamed forces of nature, and the milk representing domestication and nourishment. The laughter, a sign of life, relief, and the triumph of order over chaos. Once these initial rites were complete, the Luperci would feast on the sacrificial meat and drink plenty of wine. This was a communal meal, a way to share in the divine power of the sacrifice. After they had their fill, they would cut the skins of the sacrificed goats into strips. These strips were called fibua, from which we get the name of the month, February, meaning the month of purification. Now, clad only in girdles, made from the same goat, Luperci would burst from the cave and run a specific course around the base of the Palatine Hill. This was the original boundary of the city of Rome, the sacred Pomerium. As they ran, they would whip bystanders, especially women, with the goatskin thongs. This sounds shocking to us, but for the Romans, it was a desired act. Women would line the streets and eagerly offer their hands and backs to be struck. Why? Because it was believed that being touched by the fibula would grant fertility and ensure an easy childbirth. It was a potent, magical act of purification and blessing, connecting the raw, fertile power of the wild directly to the people of Rome. This public spectacle was the heart of Lupercalia. It was chaotic, noisy, and exhilarating. Imagine young, near-naked men, full of wine and religious fervor, running through the streets of Rome, laughing and striking people with bloody strips of hide. It was a temporary, sanctioned breakdown of social order, a return to a more primitive, instinctual state. This was a key aspect of many ancient festivals, allowing a moment of chaos to ultimately reinforce social and cosmic order. Over the centuries, Lupercalia evolved. By the late Roman Republic, even powerful figures like Mark Antony participated as a loop in 44 veces during the festival. Antony famously tried to place a royal diadem on Julius Caesar's head, an event that fueled the conspiracy against Caesar. This shows how the festival, even in its wildness, was intertwined with the highest levels of Roman politics and power. However, the festival's overtly pagan and chaotic nature made it a prime target for the rising influence of Christianity. As the Roman Empire transitioned to a Christian state, ancient traditions were suppressed or repurposed. Church leaders condemned Lupercalia for its pagan superstitions and public indecency. In the late 5th century, Pope Gelasius I finally put an end to it, criticizing the festival and claiming it was ineffective anyway. He is often credited with replacing it, or at least helping to popularize, the Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary, also known as Candlemas. On February 2nd, some also speculate he may have promoted a Tamar celebration of St. Valentine on February 14th to supplant the wild fertility rites of and so the wild run of the Luperci came to an end. The wolf priests faded into history, and their primal ritual was replaced by more subdued Christian observances. But the spirit of Lupercalia, this fascinating blend of myth, magic, and civic religion, offers us a powerful glimpse into the Roman psyche. It shows us a people who, despite their sophisticated laws and engineering, still felt a deep connection to the wild, untamed forces of nature, to the she-wolf that started it all, and to the raw, chaotic, and life-giving power of fertility. It reminds us that beneath the marble and order of Rome, there was always a beating heart of something much older and wilder. The story of Lupercalia is a perfect example of how ancient societies used ritual to make sense of their world, to ensure their survival, and to connect with their foundational myths. What do you think of this ancient festival? Would you have lined the streets to be struck by the Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how our modern perspectives clash with these ancient traditions. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Rome. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and want to uncover more fascinating stories from the past, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the bell so you won't miss our next adventure. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we're stepping onto the very ground where Rome itself was born, a place where myth and reality are so intertwined it is hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. We're on the Palatine Hill, the centermost of the 7 hills of Rome, and we're about to delve into the archaeology of one of the world's greatest foundation legends. For centuries, the story of Romulus and Remus, the twin boys suckled by a she-wolf, has been just that, a story. A powerful, enduring myth, but a myth nonetheless. But what if I told you that beneath our feet? Archaeologists have been uncovering clues that suggest this foundational tale might have roots in something real. That's what we're here to explore. Our story starts with a she-wolf Lupa, who finds 2 abandoned infants by the Tiber River and nurses them in her lair. This cave, known as the Lupercalia, was said to be right here, at the base of the Palatine Hill. For a long time, its exact location was lost to history, considered little more than a folkloric landmark. But then, in 2007, an incredible discovery was made. While using a special camera to probe the ground near the ruins of Emperor Augustus's palace, archaeologists stumbled upon a richly decorated underground vault. The images that came back were breathtaking. A vaulted chamber, 16 meters below the surface, encrusted with intricate mosaics of seashells and colored marble. At the center of the ceiling, a white eagle, a symbol of the Roman Empire. The design and location matched ancient descriptions of the Lupercalia, a place Augustus himself had restored. Could this be it? The sacred cave where Rome's legendary founders were saved. The debate among scholars is intense, but the possibility is electrifying. Standing here, you can almost feel the weight of those millennia, the echo of that ancient story. The Palatine Hill isn't just the site of the potential loop, it's also where the next chapter of the legend unfolds. After being raised by the shepherd Faustulus, Romulus and Remus returned to this very hill to found their new city. According to the historian Livy, Romulus stood right here on the Palatine to watch for a divine Sanan augury of birds to determine who would be king. He saw 12 vultures, while Remus, on the nearby Aventine Hill, saw only 6. Romulus was declared the victor, and this is where archaeology gives the story another layer of credibility. In the 1980s, the Italian archaeologist Andrea Carandini began excavations on the northern slope of the Palatine. What he found was astonishing: the remains of a defensive wall and a ditch, dated with surprising precision to the mid-8th century BC, the very period when Rome tradition says the city was founded. Even more intriguing, he found evidence of a ritual burial at the gate of this ancient wall, suggesting a human sacrifice connected to the city's foundation. Could this be the physical evidence of Romulus killing Remus for leaping over his newly built wall, as the legend tells? Carandini's interpretation is bold and not without its critics. He calls these remnants the Wall of Romulus. Whether or not you accept his direct link to the myth, the discovery itself is monumental. It proves that a fortified, organized settlement existed on the Palatine Hill in the 8th century BC. This wasn't just a collection of huts. It was the beginning of a city, a proto-Rome, existing at the exact time the legends claim. As we walk through these ruins, we see more than just old stones. We see the layers of history building upon the myth. Just a stone's throw from Carandini's wall are the remains of what are called the huts of Romulus. These are post holes carved into the bedrock, outlining several oval-shaped huts from the Iron Age, again, dating back to the 8th century BC. Ancient Romans revered this spot, preserving it for centuries as the literal home of their founder. They saw these humble foundations as a tangible link to their origin story, a reminder of their city's rustic beginnings before it became an empire. And what's fascinating is how later Romans, especially the emperors, leveraged this legendary past. Emperor Augustus, Rome's first emperor, deliberately chose to build his grand palace right here on the Palatine Hill, overlooking the site of the Lupercalia and the huts of Romulus. It was a brilliant political move. By physically associating himself with the city's founder, he presented himself not as a dictator who had ended the Republic, but as a second founder, a restorer of Roman values and destiny. He was essentially saying, "The story that began here with Romulus continues with me, His home was literally built on top of Rome's foundation myth. So, as we stand here amidst the ruins, surrounded by the ghosts of emperors and the echoes of myth, we're faced with a fascinating puzzle. Is the story of Romulus and Remus pure fiction? Or is it a dramatized, mythologized memory of real historical events? The archaeology doesn't give us a simple yes or no answer. It doesn't show us a birth certificate for Romulus or a name tag on the she-wolf. Instead, it does something far more interesting. It shows us that at the very time the legends are set, a real community was taking shape here. A wall was built. A leader, perhaps one with a name like Romulus, established a settlement. A foundational event, possibly violent and ritualistic, occurred. The myth, then, may not be a record of history, but a powerful, symbolic explanation that later generations created to understand their own origins. It's a narrative woven around a kernel of historical truth. The Palatine Hill is not just an archaeological site, it's a testament to the power of stories. It shows us how legends can shape a city's identity, how leaders can use them to legitimize their power, and how, sometimes, if you dig deep enough, you might just find that the stories you have always been told have a foundation not just in imagination, but in the very earth itself. The line between myth and history here isn't a line at all. It's a rich, overlapping landscape, and we've only just begun to explore it. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible exploration of Rome's legendary origins. If you found this journey as fascinating as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. And do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next adventure. Until next time, keep digging for the truth. Have you ever wondered where history ends and myth begins? For ancient Rome, that line is beautifully, intentionally blurred. We all know the story of Romulus and Remus, the twin boys suckled by a she-wolf, who went on to found the Eternal City. It's a fantastic tale, but is it history? Well, to the Romans, it was something more. It was their identity, their destiny, all wrapped up in a divine narrative. And the master architects of this story weren't soldiers or emperors, but writers. Today, we're diving into how the literary giants, Livy and Virgil, took threads of myth and wove them into the very fabric of Roman history. Let's start with Livy. Picture this. The Roman Republic is in turmoil. Civil wars have torn it apart, and a new era under Emperor Augustus is just beginning. There's a deep yearning for stability, for a sense of shared purpose. Enter Titus Livius, or Livy, as we know him. He embarks on a colossal project to write the entire history of Rome, from its mythical origins right up to his own time. His work, Abi Orb Condita, from the founding of the city, was under just a dry chronicle of events. It was a moral epic. Livy knew the stories of Romulus and Remus were, let's say, historically questionable. He even admits it himself, saying he can neither confirm nor deny these poetic tales. But that wasn't the point. For him, the value of these stories wasn't in their factual accuracy, but in their power to inspire. By presenting Romulus as the son of Mars, the god of war, Livy wasn't just telling a cool story. He was making a powerful statement. Rome est destiny to conquer and rule was divinely ordained from its very first breath. It was in their blood, a gift from the gods. He painted these early figures as paragons of Roman virtuosa's duty to gods, country, and family. Virtues, courage and manliness, and gravitas, a sense of seriousness and responsibility. Think of Cincinnatus, the farmer who was made dictator, saved Rome, and then immediately returned to his plow without a second thought for power. Or Lucretia, whose tragic story sparked the overthrow of the monarchy and the birth of the Republic. Were these accounts 100% accurate? Probably not, but for Livy, they were essential teaching tools. He was using the past, real or imagined, to shape the present, reminding the Romans of the virtues that had made them great and urging them to live up to that legacy. He was, in essence, creating a national mythology that every Roman could rally behind. Now, if Livy was the historian who used myth, Virgil was the poet who turned myth into history. While Livy chronicled Rome's rise, Virgil was given a more specific, and perhaps even more influential, task by Emperor Augustus himself, to write a national epic that would rival Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The result was the Aeneid, and it is nothing short of a masterpiece of literary propaganda. The Aeneid tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan prince who escapes the fall of Troy and, after a long and arduous journey, lands in Italy. Why is this significant? Because, according to Virgil, Aeneas's descendants are the ones who would eventually found Rome. This was pure genius. It directly linked Rome not to some local shepherds, but to the glorious, heroic world of Troy. It gave them an ancient, noble lineage, effectively back-engineering their history to make them the rightful heirs of a legendary civilization. But Virgil went further. He didn't just connect Rome to Troy, he connected it directly to the gods and to a preordained destiny. The entire epic is driven by fate. The god Jupiter himself declares that Aeneas's descendants will build an empire without end. Throughout his journey, Aeneas is constantly reminded of his duty as Peir. He isn't a hero like Odysseus, driven by personal glory and a desire to get home. Aeneas is a reluctant hero, burdened by the immense responsibility of founding a nation. He sacrifices his own happiness, including his love for Queen Dido of Carthage, all for the sake of this future Roman people. This characterization of Aeneas was a deliberate parallel to Emperor Augustus. Augustus saw himself as a restorer of the Republic, a man who had sacrificed his personal life for the good of the state. By celebrating Aeneas's sense of duty, Virgil was implicitly celebrating Augustus. When Aeneas travels to the underworld, he is shown a parade of future Roman heroes including a direct vision of Augustus himself, who will bring about a golden age. The message couldn't be clearer. Augustus's rule wasn't a political accident. It was the ultimate fulfillment of a divine plan set in motion centuries earlier. So, what do we see when we put Livy and Virgil side? We see two different methods achieving the same goal. Livy, the historian, took existing myths and framed them as moral lessons, grounding Roman identity in a virtuous, if semi-legendary, past. He made Romans feel proud of where they came from. Virgil, the poet, created a grand, sweeping myth, linking Rome's destiny to the will of the gods and the heroes of old. He made Romans feel a sense of profound purpose, a belief in their manifest destiny. Together, they performed a kind of literary alchemy. They transformed folk tales and legends into a powerful national narrative. They taught the Romans that their city wasn't just a place on a map. It was the culmination of history, the fulfillment of prophecy. The line between myth and history was blurred because, for the purpose of building a unified, confident Roman identity, it didn't need to be sharp. What mattered was the story, a story of divine origins, heroic struggles, and an unwavering destiny to rule the world. This blend of myth and history became Rome's truth, a foundation as solid and enduring as the stone Colosseum. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are just as important as the facts. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of Roman storytelling. If you enjoyed this exploration of myth and history, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more deep dives into the ancient world. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we arrive at Chapter 19, The Eternal City. We're diving deep into a story that's more than just a myth. It's the very soul of Rome, a tale that has echoed through millennia, sapping empires, inspiring art, and defining political power. I'm talking, of course, about the legendary twins, Romulus and Remus. So, how did a story about two abandoned babies, suckled by a she-wolf, become the foundational epic of the greatest empire the world had ever known? It's a question that takes us to the heart of what it means to be Roman. This wasn't just a quaint bedtime story for them. It was a declaration of destiny, a divine stamp of approval on their ambition and their right to rule. Imagine you're a Roman citizen walking through the Forum. You see statues and reliefs everywhere depicting the she-wolf and the twins. You hear orators reference their divine ancestry, linking your city directly to the god of war, Mars. This story wasn't just in the background. It was the operating system of Roman identity. It explained their resilience, their fierceness in battle, and their unshakable belief that Rome was destined for greatness. The message was clear. We are the sons of Mars, raised by a creature of the wild. We are survivors. We are conquerors. This origin story was a masterstroke of political branding. When Rome was just a small city-state, vying for dominance on the Italian peninsula, this myth gave them an edge. It wasn't just a claim to land. It was a claim to a divine mandate. It unified a diverse population under a single, powerful narrative. It told them, no matter where you come from, if you are Roman, you are part of this incredible destiny. It fueled the Roman legions as they marched across the known world. They weren't just conquering, they were fulfilling a prophecy that began with 2 infants by the river Tiber. And the story is brutal, isn't it? It ends in fratricide, with Romulus killing Remus to become the sole founder of the city. The Romans didn't shy away from this violent beginning. In fact, they embraced it. It served as a stark, perpetual warning. The unity and security of Rome are paramount, more important than anything, even brotherly love. This single, violent act, the city's dawn, justified the often ruthless decisions made by emperors and senators for centuries to come. The Pater Patria, the father of the fatherland, had to make hard choices for the good of the family of Rome. As Rome grew from a republic into an empire, the myth of the twins evolved with it. Emperors like Augustus used the story to legitimize their own power, by linking his family line back to the founders, and by extension to the gods. Augustus wasn't just a ruler. He was the inheritor of Rome's divine mission. He commissioned epic poems, like Virgil's Aeneid, which cleverly wove the story of Romulus and Remus into a grander narrative, stretching back to Troy. This created an unbroken chain of destiny, making Roman dominance seem not just accidental, but preordained by the fates themselves. The power of this image, the Lupercalia, the Capitoline wolf, is incredible. It became the ultimate symbol of Romanetis, or Romanness. It was stamped on coins, molded into sculptures, and painted on walls from Britain to Syria. When you saw that Chivalve, you saw the power, the reach, and the eternal nature of Rome. It was a symbol of both nurturing and ferocity, the city that cared for its citizens like a mother, but would defend its interests with the savagery of a wolf. Even after the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, the story refused to die. It was too powerful. The idea of Rome, the eternal city, lived on. During the Renaissance, artists like Rubens and sculptors like Bernini were obsessed with the myth. They saw in it a timeless drama of human ambition, divine will, and tragic conflict. For them, recreating the story wasn't just about copying ancient art. It was about tapping into the enduring spirit of classical greatness that they hoped to revive in their own time. And the echo continues. Think about politics. Leaders from Mussolini to modern day, politicians have co-opted Roman imagery to project strength and legacy. The Chivalve symbol is still the emblem of the city of Rome today. It's on manhole covers, official documents, and the AS Roma football team's crest. Why? Because it still resonates. It speaks to a legacy of endurance, of rising from humble beginnings to achieve world-shaping greatness. The story of Romulus and Remus is a perfect example of how mythology can be more real than reality. It shaped law, it justified wars, it built an identity that has lasted for over 2,000 years. It shows us that the stories we tell ourselves about where we come from are fundamentally important. They define who we are and, more importantly, who we believe we can become. The twins, abandoned by a river, became the fathers of a civilization that would define the Western world. Their legend is not just a chapter in a history book. It is the enduring, beating heart of the eternal city. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Roman identity. The stories we inherit have incredible power, and this is one of the most powerful of all. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We have so much more to explore together. Until next time, hello and welcome back. We've journeyed far together through the winding paths of history and myth, tracing the footsteps of 2 twin boys and the Chivalve who saved them. Now, as our journey draws to a close, let's take a moment to reflect, to breathe, and to understand why this ancient story still echoes so powerfully within us. Find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let the world outside fade away for a little while. Let's begin with a gentle breath. Inhale deeply, filling your lungs with air. And as you exhale, release any tension you might be holding. Feel the ground beneath you, solid and supportive. Another deep breath in, and a slow, calming breath out. With each breath, allow yourself to sink deeper into this moment of peace, into the quiet space we're creating together. Imagine, for a moment, a vast, ancient landscape. Perhaps it's the rolling hills of Italy under a soft, golden sun, or maybe it's a forest, hushed and mysterious, dappled with light. In this timeless place, a she-wolf discovers two infants, abandoned and helpless. Instead of seeing prey, cesses life. Instead of acting on instinct, she acts from a place of profound compassion. She becomes their mother, their protector, their first home. This Imeditha, powerful, wild wolf, nurturing the vulnerable human children is the heart of our story. Why does it resonate so deeply? Because it speaks to a fundamental truth we all carry within us, the longing for a safe beginning. We all start our lives small and dependent, relying on the care of others. The she-wolf represents that unconditional, unexpected source of love and protection. She is the embodiment of grace in a harsh world, the proof that even in our most vulnerable moments, help can arrive from the most unlikely of places. She is the fierce tenderness that allows life to flourish against all odds. Think about your own origins, not just your family tree, but the web of people, places, and even happy accidents that shaped you. Who were your wolves? Who were the protectors, the mentors, the kind strangers who offered you warmth and guidance when you needed it most? They may not have had fur or fangs, but they showed you a similar kind of grace. They saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself. Take a moment to bring their faces to mind. Feel the gratitude for their presence in your life. They are a part of your foundation, the bedrock upon which you've built your identity. Now, let's turn our attention to the twins, Romulus and Remus. They are more than just historical figures. They are archetypes of siblinghood, of partnership, and of the complex dance of unity and division. They share a bond forged in the most extraordinary circumstances. They are two halves of a whole, united by a shared past and a common destiny. Their story reminds us of the profound power of family, not just the family we are born into, but the family we choose. The bond between the twins speaks to our innate need to belong, to be part of something larger than ourselves. We are social creatures, wired for connection. We seek our tribe, our pack. We yearn for that sense of shared identity, of looking at someone and saying, "You and I, we are from the same place. We understand each other." This is the essence of community. It's the feeling of knowing you are not alone in the world. Who is your twin in spirit? Who is the person or people who mirror your soul, who share your journey, who makes you feel truly seen and understood? The legend of Romulus and Remus is a story of creation, of building something new from nothing. They took their shared history, their miraculous survival, and used it as the foundation for a city that would change the world. This is a powerful metaphor for our own lives. We are all founders. We are all building our own Rome. Our lives, our careers, our families, our legacies. We gather the raw materials of our experiences, our triumphs, and our struggles, and we build something meaningful. What are you building right now? What is the city of your own life? See it in your mind's eye. See its foundations, built from the care and protection you received. See its walls, strengthened by the bonds of family and friendship. See its streets, paved with your efforts, your dreams, and your resilience. Every action you take, every choice you make, is another stone laid, another structure raised. Your life is a testament to your ability to create, to build, and to manifest your vision in the world. Of course, the story is not without its shadows. The eventual conflict between the brothers reminds us that even the strongest bonds can be tested. It speaks to the human struggle between unity and individuality, between shared goals and personal ambition. But even in this tragedy, there is a lesson. It teaches us the importance of communication, of respect, and of finding a way to honor both our connections to others and our own individual paths. It reminds us to handle our most precious relationships with care. As we bring this meditation to a close, let's return to the central image of the wolf. The wolf in our dreams is not a creature to be feared. It is a symbol of our wild, instinctual nature, the part of us that is fiercely protective, deeply loyal, and connected to the earth. It is the untamed strength within us that allows us to survive, to adapt, and to nurture. It is the guardian of our origins, the keeper of our deepest sense of belonging. When you feel lost or disconnected, remember this, wolf. Remember that within you lies a powerful, loving force capable of overcoming any obstacle. When you feel lonely, remember the twins. Remember that you are part of a vast web of connection, and that your tribe is out there, waiting for you. And when you doubt your ability to create, remember Rome. Remember that you are a builder, and your life is your masterpiece. Let's take one final, deep breath together. Inhale the strength of the wolf, the bond of the twins, and the creative spirit of the founder. And as you exhale, release any remaining doubts or fears. Carry the peace and insight of this moment with you. Let this ancient story be a source of comfort and inspiration, a reminder of the enduring human quest for roots, for family, and for a place to call home. Gently begin to bring your awareness back to the room. Wiggle your fingers and toes. When you feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Thank you so much for sharing this journey with me. It has been an honor to explore these powerful myths alongside you. If this series has resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It allows us to continue creating this content and building our community together. Thank you again, and be well.